Hey folks, welcome to this session. Today we are going to talk about how how to make a solid foundation to become backend developer. Just to set the context, this would be mostly be helpful to people who are starting out in tech. They want to learn backend development, or maybe they have already started out and they're looking for their first backend job. This is targeted towards them. So we'll talk about how to master backend development without getting lost into real hell. If you're able to hear me clearly, just let me know in the chat if the voice is clear, or should I speak louder. Just let me know in the chat. And what we'll focus on, I'll go one by one. I'll start with the guiding principles and we'll talk about how this is made. But overall, what I would focus on is the core fundamentals that never go out of date. So SQL is one thing that never goes out of date. It has been around for decades now, over 40 years now. It's been there, it will be there. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about APIs. APIs are how you create contracts with your front end applications, either uh, maybe it's on a browser or it's on a mobile or it's on any other interface. So your backend would be centralized. Your front end, your user could be on any platform. Your user might also be on a AR or VR platform. You might have seen Apple Vision and other headsets are out now. So user might use backend on any of their platform. It might be on even on their watch, but your backend would be the same, which will serve data to your different types of front end. So we'll talk about APIs and then we'll talk about scaling up. So those are the core fundamentals of backend that never go out of date. Uh, and we'll also talk about real world projects that you can build while learning everything that helps you in two ways. You don't get lost into tutorial hell, as well as you have projects to showcase whenever you are looking out for a job. And this is made in a way that it does not really matter where you're coming from. Your background does not matter whether you have a CS degree or not. It really doesn't matter as long as you showcase this in your portfolio. People will be happy to help you, or people will be happy to interview you for a backend developer job. All right, let's start. I see a bunch of cities in the chat. People are here from Pune, Chikmagalur, Pune, Bangalore, Jabalpur. Nice, Mumbai. All right, Bangalore. Okay, okay. Uh, Meerut. All right, cool. So, okay, let's start with this. And whenever you have a doubt, just don't wait for the end. Just put in the chat right away, and based on the flow, I'll either take your question right away or I might take it at the end. But don't wait for the end to put your question. So, overall, the first takeaway that I want you to have is master databases in depth and API design. If you just focus on these two core things, you'll become unstoppable. I'll talk about how or what everything entails in this. Guiding principles, how we have made this. The first thing is frameworks come and go, fundamentals are forever. So we'll focus on the core concepts that you can apply across all languages, all tools. So you will not see any mention of any language or a particular tool in this roadmap. Practice is the key. Reading is easy. Even if you see, if you are listening to me right now, even listening is also very easy. But implementing is where real learning happens. This is the key. Show, don't tell. Instead of saying ki, hey, I can do this thing, I can write queries in SQL, I can design APIs. Instead of saying I can do this, you show, you share your project link and say that, hey, this, I'm not telling, I'm showing, I have done this. So a project is a great way to prove your skill. Avoid tutorial hell. This is important. What I feel is you should pick and stick to a structured roadmap. It could be this roadmap, it could be any other roadmap, that is up to you. But you shouldn't move between roadmaps. So pick one thing, stick to it. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Consistency matters more. If you just after this call, you'll get super motivated and spend 4 hours on something, but tomorrow or next week you're not doing more, then that does not help. So you have to put in time consistently. Anyone can learn it, no prior things required, and have fun. So that's why I've like divided it into different things so that you feel like, hey, this is done, and you're moving to the next thing. So it almost feels like a game for you. Um, Build things, break things, fix them. That's how um, you will be most motivated to complete this. So just focusing on this image here. On the left, you can see um, someone who is actually climbing the ladder, and on the right, you can see that that person is just waiting because the difficulty or the difference between the two rungs of the ladder is very high. So, he or she is just stuck there. So that's what I mean by not progressing or getting stuck in tutorial hell. Um, Make it divide into small parts so that you can see progress and you start moving upwards. Prerequisites, just sharing it again so that if you don't know this, then you first focus on these before going further. So you should be comfortable with one programming language. Any language works. You could be using Node.js, basically JavaScript, or Python, or Java, or Golang. Any language works actually. Like I said above, this is independent of the frameworks and tools. As long as you're comfortable programming, you know uh, the concept of arrays, objects, you're comfortable using them, loops, functions, we should be good to go. Um, you should be able to use Git to track code changes, because when you're building on top of a particular feature, it's always good to have that backup in place. So we should be able to use Git to track code changes. You can navigate basic command line. You can run commands. You're familiar with the Unix environment. You're familiar with the terminal basically, so that things become easier for you. You know how to debug errors using print statements or an IDE. So if you're using an IDE, you can actually sort of use the debugger, which most IDEs have. You can step into it. Uh, that might be a bit complex for someone who is just starting out. So the simplest way to debug is using print statements. Everyone does it. It's fine. Um, so yeah, as long as you know how to debug things, that should be good to go. Should understand what an API is and how the internet works, basic HTTP, because you're building an API, so it's good to have that familiarity in place, and can Google effectively when stuck. Note that I have not put in chat GPT effectively when stuck, because when you're learning it the first time, maybe chat GPT is not the right way to learn new things. You might miss a lot of nuances, so it's better to do it yourself. Once you have done it a bunch of times, then of course you can use AI for help. But yes, for starters, stick with Google is what I would highly recommend. Let's start with the roadmap. So step one, and which is something that is the backbone of the entire front end development field, is start out with fundamentals of SQL. And I've like added the emphasis on don't skip this, because I've seen that people directly jump to APIs, which is not really helpful. Um, your foundations need to be very strong. That is what will help you become a great backend developer. Start with data modeling in SQL, learn how to create, delete, modify tables. Someone is asking, can we get a copy of these slides later? Yeah, I'll share. I'll share at the end. So you don't need to like copy this. For now, you can just listen, and if you have doubts, you can just ask in the chat. All right. So I was talking about learn how to create tables, delete tables, modify tables, learn what are primary keys, secondary keys, composite keys. This is something, as soon as you start looking into SQL, these would be the first concepts that come up. I'm just giving you sort of like a checklist so that you know if there's something missing here that you don't know of. First, you need to figure that out, learn about it before moving to the next step. learn about constraints, what is a unique constraint, what is a default constraint, what is a not null constraint, and how to choose the right data type. So just like you have data types in your programming language, for example, integer, string, arrays, objects, you also have a bunch of data types in SQL, and they are very very granular. You might find out multiple data types for an integer itself. Same for strings also. Um, okay, let's do a quick exercise. Can someone name the different data types for numbers and strings in SQL? If anyone knows, just type it quickly in the chat. And why I'm focusing on that is these kind of things really matter a lot uh, when you're designing a database from scratch. If there's something already there in place, then of course you might not need to know about these things. Okay, someone has mentioned um, there is char, there's varchar, there is text. These are the different types for a string. And then for a number, there is big int, there is tiny int, there is medium int. There's a bunch of uh, other data types for a number as well. And these are just strings and numbers. And then there are 10 different other data types. So figure out or learn about the existence of different types and see where what is the ideal use case for each of them. And then after data modeling, you move on to writing queries, which is fetching data using select, where, order by, limit. You don't need to like get overwhelmed with all of that. Once you start going line by line, you'll see that it's actually easy. Then you will do aggregations on data, which is combining data. Like if you think about, let's take an example of a teacher scoring their classes uh, exam sheet. So for example, let's say maths ka exam tha, and there's a class size of 50 people, and all of the 50 people, they wrote an exam and they submitted the answer sheet on on the to the teacher, and the teacher scored all of them, and now they want to do some statistics on top of it. What is the average marks of the class? What is the minimum marks? What is the maximum marks? uh, Things like that. Okay, someone has asked, as a backend developer, do we need to focus on writing raw query in SQL or use ORM for database interaction? So the answer to that is you should know how to write a raw query, and that is where the step one focuses on. Once you know how to write the raw query, in a later stage you can move to ORM. But like think like this: if you don't know the basics, then any abstraction that you work on at the top, it will always be shallow. So it's always good to go in depth, because if you run into any issue, your your knowledge of the depth of the concept, that will actually help you and set you apart from other developers out there. Shallow knowledge तो अभी AI को भी है, right? So what AI does not have is depth. So if you know things in depth, then you can actually challenge someone's opinion either in your team or even AI's opinion. Like AI does not have depth, right? If you say something strongly, it will just agree to you. Ki, ha, you are right. So to have that opinion, you need to have that depth. And especially if you're starting out, it's better to have the depth, because other things can actually come and go. So things like which ORM you are you using, that is something that might actually change 2 years down the line. But the underlying concept of a query, a SQL query, that remains the same. So it's better to have that mastered. So yeah, we talked about aggregation and then um, filtering data, insert, update, delete things. Um, I've also mentioned a project for every step. Let's talk about the project for this. For now, you just start with a simple project. wherein you design a database schema for a to-do list. So everyone might have used a to-do list sometime, right? As simple as taking a piece of paper and write down your day's tasks on it, and then when you complete that task, you just put a tick right next to it. That's the basic version of a to-do list uh, app or to-do list method that most of us uses, because we cannot remember 10 things that we need to do in a on a daily basis, right? So it could be your daily chores that you might need to do, or you might have a some deadline that you need to meet, or you need to have something that you need to remember. Usually people write things down in one place. So just translate that into a database. How would you store your to-do items in a database? Which fields you will have, which data types will you use for it, and then how will you write the data? Uh, how will you write a query to fetch the data from that? Just start with this. It might seem very simple, but this gives you a concrete direction, or a concrete progress. Let's say if you start with this, and if you're just starting out, right, you've never learned SQL before, and you spend a few weeks and you're able to do this project, that gives you a very concrete win or a concrete sense of progress that, hey, this is done. Then now you can move to the next step. So yeah, with that, let's go to the next step. Next step is database design and relationships. So here are the things that you should learn next. The first, and actually the most important thing, is when to create a new column versus a new table. So as soon as you start working with more complex data, you will run into this question a lot, which is what is the uh, what is the optimal way of storing this data? Should I just create 100 columns for a particular piece of information, or should I move something into a new table? And this understanding is something which I've put in the step 2. So this sort of comes into a bit advanced SQL. Don't right away jump into it. If you don't know SQL, don't go into it right away. But once you're comfortable with a bunch of SQL queries, and designing a bunch of simple databases, the next step would be this, which is understanding how to model complex relationships. I mentioned a bunch of types, which is a one-to-one relationship, one-to-many relationship, many-to-many relationship. Again, I've just put it so that this serves as guidance on what you should be learning next. Learn about foreign keys, learn about indexing. So you'll get a good sense of how database works in the real world. The project for this is build a mini blog database with users and posts. So in the previous project, there was just one table, right? You just had all of your list of to do items in one table. Now we are moving to two tables. We have a users table, we have a posts table. So think of it as a blog. Let's say medium.com has a lot of blogs, Substack has a lot of blogs. So you have a blog, and then there is an author. If you go to the author, you can see the list of all blogs written by the author. So now let's try to model that relationship in the database. So you'll have one database, one table of users, one table of posts, and then you write SQL queries to fetch posts by different filters. So for example, you might uh, do what are the latest posts by a particular user, what are uh, what are some what is the oldest post by a user, how how many posts in total are there for user. You can like try out a bunch of different queries. So see, the complexity is increasing in every step. At first we started with one table. Once you're comfortable with that, then only move to the second table. The mistake that I see many people do is they directly jump to the next step. If you directly jump to the second step and uh, you directly start attempting to design a multi-table database, it might work for someone, right? Someone might say, नहीं मेरे को तो एक बार में समझ में आ गया. But then that's not a recipe for success. That is not repeatable. If 100 people try it, only one or two will be able to get it in the first try. So that's not a good guidance, or that's not a good roadmap. So a better way, uh, a more what do you say? There's a term in mathematics which is called the expected outcome, which is what is it's the value of the outcome multiplied by the probability of achieving that outcome. So the outcome is the same, which is you master SQL, but the probability of achieving that outcome is higher when you go step by step. So that's what I am mentioning here. Next, let's move to the uh, final step in SQL, which is working with multiple tables. Here you will start focusing on combining data with multiple tables. You can learn about joins, inner joins, left join, right join, full join. You sort of figure out how to combine the data between the two, learn about union versus union all. And the project here is an extension of the above. Extend the blog database to support likes and comments. Think about uh, Facebook or a Twitter. You have whenever you're seeing a post, you can basically like it and comment on it, right? So how do you support those features? That is the complexity here. Keep a visitor count for each blog post so that you can show analytics, 10 people viewed this post, something like that. And then from a query perspective, you can try this query, write a query to show the top three most popular posts for each user. So if you're able to extend the above project to this, then pretty much you're comfortable with SQL. If you reach this step, then you're ready to go to the next step, which is API. So in terms of the roadmap, we are halfway there. Now we'll move to the next step, which is APIs. Any questions in the SQL so far, be it in the topics, the steps, the project, or anything? Just put it in the chat. We'll take a quick 10 seconds break and then we'll move into the next section. All right, let's move to the next section. Now we'll talk about APIs. So API design is the core of the backend, of course. Previously, I said SQL is the core. So yeah, these two are combined. Like when you combine these two, they are the backbone. Database is your single source of truth, which stores all of the data. And then your API is the contract between your front end and the back end, or multiple front ends and back end. So, like I said at the start as well, if you master databases in API design, you don't need anything else. Like everything else, you can figure it out on the go. These two things are the core things that you need to master the found, which basically helps you in mastering the foundations. So, for API design, the first thing is to understand REST APIs, how or what are the different HTTP methods, get, post, put, delete, where do you use each of them, what are different HTTP codes, 200, 400, 500, what do they mean, where do we use them. Once like this might feel a bit theoretical, these two things, but once you know this, then you can move into building or writing APIs. So uh, the basic thing that you will start whenever you start API design is you start with CRUD operations on a database. CRUD is create, read, update, and delete. And then, like someone mentioned in the chat above, now you can use an ORM. to query data. Um, you can use any of the ORM. It doesn't matter really. You might use Prisma type ORM, SQL Alchemy. There are 10 other different ORMs out there. The actual ORM doesn't matter. What matters is understanding the difference between writing a raw SQL query and using an ORM to interact with the database. And then you read about API naming best practices when you are adding a new endpoint, or when you are even writing something from scratch. How do you actually name the API endpoints? That is something that's something which is very important. You cannot like um, put random names in. Let's say if you're building two endpoints, you cannot have a very random name for each of them. They should be coherent. So when you read about this, you'll figure out how to name them in a coherent way. Another important thing to learn here is how to integrate with a third party API, because it's usually the case that you will be using someone else's API, which is you will be using someone else's contract to serve something to your user. So how do you call an external API? And now the complexity here increases because you also have to handle rate limits. APIs typically provide you with a very quantified usage quota. You cannot just do an infinite number of requests um, to an API, because this is the major difference between a front end and a back end. A front end can scale infinitely because the front end is actually executing on the client's end. If I am using a web browser, then the computations are happening on the browser itself. When all the data, the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, everything has been transferred to my browser, and then they're running on my end itself. Whether it's a mobile application, same thing. Everything I've installed it, and then when I'm opening it, everything is running locally itself. So all the computations that are required to, let's say, scale it up to 100 users, 1,000 users, 10,000 users, it's happening on the device itself. If I'm using a smartwatch, it's happening there. If I am, let's say, using something else, uh, let's say I'm using a VR headset, then again the processor is there. Or if the headset is connected to a PC, then all the computations are happening there. So overall, front end is very easy to scale because it's just happening. It's almost like bring your own resource. I have a resource and then I want the front end to run there. But for backend, you have to have a server installed which is serving your requests. So you cannot just have, let's say, if it is, let's say, serving 10 users, 20 users, it cannot just start serving 1 million users ekdam se, because it's not really um, allocated. Those many resources are not really allocated that much, because the resources are costly if you are provisioning that much of a capacity. So from that perspective, the an important thing to handle in API design and integrating with third-party APIs is how do you figure out, how do you work with API rate limits? How do you ensure that when you are being spammed, or when you are being DDoSed, you don't affect your dependent, or you don't affect the third-party service that you are dependent on, because pretty much it's like a spam attack. The next thing to understand is webhooks and event-driven architecture. I would say maybe you can put this as optional for now, because I think if you are able to do the rate limits nicely, I think you're pretty much good to go. For the project, this is the project that I have for you. So what you can do is, in your portfolio website, if it's not there, if your portfolio website is not there, it's totally fine. You can create a new one after this call. But if you have one already, what I would recommend is you add a slash GitHub route to your portfolio website, and then you build an API that connects to the GitHub API and shows your user activity log. So on GitHub, you might be creating a new repository, committing to pushing a commit to a repository, creating a pull request, or leaving a comment or reviewing a pull request. All of these are considered as events um, of the user. So you'll find a GitHub API that allows you to get those events uh, filtered by a particular username. So your username you can add there. And if you add a new route on your portfolio website, it pretty much is a proof of work, right? You are demonstrating that you are able to call a third party API, an external API from your backend. So this is the first project of the API that I would suggest you to build. This would be fun because you when you see your own data, na, so that gives much more excitement than a random thing like a weather app or something. So this is your own GitHub data. So when you see that, you'll yourself feel nice about it. So you can try doing this. The next step, going a bit more advanced into API, this is something that you can work on. Learn authentication and access management. What does that mean? Authentication means it's almost like when you're entering an airport, you have to show your passport, right? You're sort of authenticating yourself that hey, I am this person. So it's similar, which is you give a proof of ki, hey, I am this person, and based on that, you get access to something. Learn about authentication versus authorization. They're not the same. You'll figure out once you go into this. Again, don't jump into this directly. Go step by step. Start with basic authentication, username, password. Then you can go to OAuth 2.0 and social logins. You might have seen a bunch of websites do sign in with Google, sign in with Twitter. Sign in with X now. Sign in with LinkedIn, sign in with Outlook, sign in with Apple, a bunch of things, right? So those are your social logins. GWT and session-based thought uh, you can look into. Middlewares for access control. I think this is important. An important next step to sort of learn about when when leveling up in API design. Middlewares is some I think I'll not do a good justice, but try to explain it in short. But yeah, you can look into it step by step and learn about how to implement this in your project. Here's the follow-up task on our previous project itself. You'll see that they're not the projects are not very independent. They built on the previous complexity that you have done. So what you can try doing is make the GitHub page a protected route on your portfolio website. You could uh, you could maybe just keep it behind a password. So when someone opens it, they need to enter something. The page might just show, hey, enter the password or enter the secret key, uh, something like that. You might have a little treasure hunt as well, whatever you want to do. Or you can just in the console, you can just mention, hey, this is the password, however you want to show it. Um, but make it protected. And then when someone is opening this route, they understand this that hey, how to authenticate users. It could also be hey, just it needs to sign in with GitHub, right? That might also be helpful. So it when someone clicks on sign in with GitHub, you take there's a whole flow of the social login which you'll find out, or you might have used it already, right? You click in sign with GitHub, then you go to the GitHub page, then you click on allow, then you come back. That is the kind of the flow. So that's a pretty cool thing to implement on your personal portfolio website itself. And why I'm focusing on your portfolio website is because that elevates your portfolio website itself into a project. So many times what happens is when you're applying to a job, you have your projects on your resume, yes, but you'll also have a portfolio website, right? Which is similar to a resume or a LinkedIn profile. And then you will have links to other projects there. But it might be the case that someone doesn't really open the projects. But in this way, you are making a personal portfolio website itself a project. So something like we mentioned this here, right? Build an API that connects to the GitHub API. What you can also do is you can let's say connect to the Spotify API, right? You can actually show what music you're listening to live on your website. I've seen a bunch of portfolios do that. So you can actually figure that out as well. First, figure this out. If once you've done this, then you can go to the next level, which is uh, do the Spotify integration. It's pretty cool actually. If if you open someone's portfolio website and you can see, hey, last listen to this song, let's say 1 hour ago. I think that's pretty cool. Or maybe a live streaming as well. Hey, currently listening to this song. So yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, so make the GitHub page directed route. Let's go to the last API step, which is working at scale. What you can do is add caching to improve API response times. So you will not, let's say, if you are doing a GitHub call again and again, you might not want to do it on every refresh. You might want to do it, you might want to have some time, let's say do once every 15 minutes or once every 30 minutes or something. So you can do some sort of a caching. Log incoming requests for debugging purposes if needed. Logging is always a good idea because you get to know what actually happened in case if anything goes wrong. And then set up a CI/CD pipeline, deploy online to any platform of your choice, Versal, Netlify, Render, etc. Like no need to use any one of these only. You can use any one of your choice, and then set up a GitHub action in a way that when you push a commit to GitHub, it gets deployed automatically. That's it. I think that sort of again shows that you are well versed with backend. The project uh, is again a follow up to the above thing, which is deploy this blog API on a live server, set up CI/CD for automatic updates. This sort of completes the API section. Uh, if you have any doubts, you can just put it in the chat. I'll wait for 10 seconds. And yeah, I think this is pretty much it. Now we'll go to putting it all together. So here is the capstone of the final challenge. So what do you want to showcase? We want to showcase that we can design a database with proper relationships, we can design APIs with authentication, and then we can deploy on a real server. It's not just on a local host. So here is something that you can do. Again, this is something that you can put on your portfolio website itself, which is build a blogging site. So you can on the portfolio website itself, you can add a blog with comments, add an admin panel to delete, and create, edit, and delete posts. Visitors can sign in, one click social auth you can add, sign in with Twitter, sign in with uh, Google or anything, and then they can add comments. And I think just for showing complexity, you can add this feature wherein the admin panel allows for approving, editing, or deleting of comments. So you might not want to show all of the comments directly, because if you if you open it directly, people might just start spamming. So this is sort of like a moderation feature wherein the comments first go into the queue or the it's visible on the admin panel wherein you can approve or edit or delete them. And if they're approved or even if they're edited and then approved, then it gets visible on on the post page. And then you can also add analytics on posts. Maintain a counter in DB for each post. You can show something like, hey, this blog has been visited, let's say 123 times, something like that. So that pretty much combines everything. It combines your database, API, authentication, third-party integrations, and deployment on a real server, which is your portfolio website itself. So, other examples you can have a job board, URL shortener, to-do list with due dates and notifications. So pretty much, like, as long as you understand what kind of complexity is good to showcase on a capstone project, you can either pick any of these examples or even any of your own as well. The example I've shown it, like, I've thought a lot about this, and this makes the most sense because you can put it on your portfolio itself. uh, that is there. And yeah, that is about it. So this roadmap is not about learning everything. You might see that, hey, uh, I've not put all of the things there, but it's about learning that matters to get you started, get you going. So you'll follow it, build projects, and you'll be ahead of most of the developers out there. In case you end up building the Capstone project, you can just drop me the project link. You can email me at swapnil@capture.com. Would love to take a look. If you have any questions around anything we discussed today, I'll also share the link here in the chat. If you have any questions, you can drop it in the chat. If not, then yeah, we'll wrap the session up. Let me quickly put the post link in the chat. All right, I put the link in the chat. Okay, someone is asking, what's a good timeline that you would recommend for someone who's a front-end developer to complete all these steps? So depends on whether you are currently working as a front-end developer already, or um, you are not working. So basically, how much time you have. So let's say if you have a lot of time, if you're not working, then pretty much you can spend maybe 5 hours or more per day on learning this. Versus if you're a working professional, then it might, you might only be able to take out 1 hour a day or 2 hours a day, something like that. So depending on that, it might vary. But overall, I think if it might take uh, almost a month for each of the topics. So SQL might take you 1 month, and then APIs might take you another month. It depends, actually, it depends on how much you know already, and then how much in depth you go to also. So, for example, there are enough things um, in here itself. So, for example, I've only mentioned a bunch of methods or a bunch of keywords here. If you go if you go like really in depth of SQL, you might find a lot more keywords such as this. So yeah, it really depends on how much in depth you go to. So there's no limit to it. But yeah, I would suggest for learning like 80% of the things in 20% of the time, 1 month each for SQL and 1 month for APIs. Like that might be a good time to get started, because then you will sort of build you'll get into the habit of building these projects. Let's say if you're putting 1 month to SQL, then you're building this to-do list, then you're building a blog, and then you're extending the blog. So you're almost done like 3 mini projects. Same for API. You do integrate with third party, deploy it, you'll figure out this, and then you build the actual capstone projects again. You build a couple of projects in that 1 month. So that I would say is a good enough timeline for this. Okay. Someone is asking, what's your take on if someone has gained this much knowledge and completed projects in one? Is it good to move on to Spring Boot or do some system design? Uh, okay, can you just reply to this message and share uh, share your current context? Like, are you working, not working? Just reply to this, and like how much is your is a total years of experience. Basically, I want to understand where are you uh, in the um, this not working. I'm a final year student. All right, so I wouldn't recommend going into system design as of now because the overall goal for you, if you're in a final year of your college, the overall goal is to get a job, right? And how will you get a job is by focusing on fundamentals. Like I can say, huh, go learn system design, but nobody really expects system design from someone who is just starting out. What they want is, hey, can you build a proper API and can you work with a database? If you're able to show complexity in these two things, I would rather recommend go deeper into SQL and API itself. So, for example, let's say here what we have done is we have limited to a bunch of tables, right? One user table, one post table, maybe one comments table, and maybe a likes table. So, like 3, 4 tables, may we have done this. Can you now design a database with 10 plus tables like that? That's a good complexity to handle. If you think about your resume, or like let's say if you think about LinkedIn, how data is stored on LinkedIn, if you start modeling it, you might need 10 or more tables. So I would rather recommend, instead of going into system design, go more into depth of these things itself. So SQL, go in more depth. uh, API also, for example, here, of course, this is also complex, but then there's no limit to complexity, right? You can just actually go and clone even the LinkedIn website itself. So you'll figure out that there are lots and lots of endpoints to be built in that clone. So yeah, all right, all right. Um, that's there, that's there. Okay, okay, okay. Okay, someone is asking how much time will it take for a fresher who is to be graduated in 2025, actively applying for jobs, and does it work same for freshers also? Also, I'm studying more, so does Node have same scope? All right, all right. Okay, so can you also like add some context on where you currently stand? Like, are you comfortable with programming? Are you learning programming? Um, have you done something before? Like, have you done front end before, or something else before, or is it the first thing that you'll be doing into programming? The more context you share, the more I think it will be helpful. Okay. Someone's asking, I have done projects using Mongo. Is it recommended to learn SQL? Yes, that is definitely recommended because when you are starting out, it's okay to start with Mongo because it might seem less overwhelming. NoSQL seems a little bit easy or a little bit easier than SQL. But if you're aiming for a backend job or a full stack job for that case, it's always better to have good understanding of SQL, or what we call them relational databases. If you know SQL, and if you don't know SQL, that's also fine. But the other way sort of creates a problem when you're looking for a backend heavy role because uh, like I said, this is sort of like the foundation of how you store data, how you model data. That is the foundation. Other things are uh, pretty much similar actually. Let's say writing APIs will, once you write a bunch of APIs, you'll figure out that most of the APIs are very similar. The the core difference lies in how you model data, how you store data, how you update data. Like that is the core difference. So modeling is something uh, that that is super important. Uh, any questions? I'll take that for some. Maybe we have a couple of minutes left. Okay, someone has said I've completed projects, looking for a job, created several live projects. I'm just sharing the link to our tests, which you can take. Actually, I'll share it to everyone. Okay, someone is asking, hey, Swapnil, I know front end dev better. Can I now learn backend? Yes, you can. So it depends on how you want or how you see your career uh, growing. If you like front end, then I would recommend you can actually just go in depth into front end itself. You don't need to learn backend, but let's say sometimes you're getting bored or sometimes you just want to expand your knowledge of how the overall uh, like a get an understanding of the bigger picture, how things work across the tech stack. So it's a good idea to explore backend. And the good thing about exploring is that you also get to experience and understand for yourself what you like better. So अगर नहीं किया है तो सब हवा में, but when you do it, you get a very concrete data point of what you like more. And once you have figured out what you like more, then actually you can put in more time and build depth there. Someone asking, can career gap people get back in job after learning and how? So yeah, I think I've just shared the link uh, right now. You can take a backend test, and irrespective of whether you have a gap or uh, any, like your past does not matter when you are applying to our tests. We test for your skills. Once you show your skills, we sort of pitch you there. All right. All right. What if I clear the test? We pitch you to companies. It's mentioned on the website as well. Cool, cool. I think we've covered most of the things. I'll just share. I think. Uh, okay, someone is asking, in the upcoming test, do we need to use specific technology, or can we use any technology of your choice, like TypeScript or Express or Postgres? You can use anything really, like depending on what you know, you can use anything because the roadmap itself is tech agnostic, right? So, uh, yeah, I think that's it. Okay, I see. I think I might have missed a couple of folks because I think we got a bunch of queries. Uh, I would recommend if you have queries and we have not answered it here, you can DM us on WhatsApp. I've shared the number in the chat. I'll just take this last question. I've built a few full stack projects using Stack. I'm planning to start applying for front end and back end junior roles. Will MongoDB be fine enough to start applying, or do I need to get familiar with SQL before applying for back end full stack junior roles? Uh, will the Capto backend test be based on SQL? All right. So yeah, If you're applying for a backend role, then SQL will be needed. If you're applying for a front end or a full stack role, it's okay even if you know MongoDB, that's fine. But actually, if you just spend a couple of weeks, you can learn the other thing pretty quickly. Learning the first thing is hard. Let me explain in other terms. Um, it's the same in programming languages. The first programming language that you learn, that will be the hardest for you. It might be C. You might have started with C++. You might have started with Logo. Okay, just put in the chat. Put in the chat which programming language did you get started with? What was the first programming language? Um, if you are learning in school itself, you might have started with Basic or Logo or anything. Uh, okay, I start seeing some answers in the chat. Okay, someone has said I start with C. Someone start with Java. Someone start with JavaScript. Someone again start with C. The C people, I feel they might have started in the 11th, 12th. Like that is the most common thing. Someone said I start with HTML. Very nice. So yeah, what I wanted to say was the first language that you learn, that is the hardest language because udhar you have to learn about these things. You have to learn about what are the different data types, how do you loop, go over things. That is what programming is, right? You do repetitive stuff. Instead of you doing it 100 times, you run a loop and then the computer does it for you. Um, Functions, which is reusability. Instead of writing the same thing 100 times, you write it once and then you reuse things. That is what automation is, right? That is what programming is uh, helpful for. So uh, from that perspective, the first programming language that you learn, that is the hardest. If you want to pick up anything new after that, let's say like different people have shared different things. Let's say if you have to pick up Python now, so now picking up a new language, you can just pick it up in a few weeks. So the same goes for databases as well. If you have actually picked up MongoDB, don't worry, you can just spend a couple of weeks and you can get onboarded with SQL as well. It's not that hard because, like I said, the first thing is harder. All right. So yeah, cool. I think we are a minute past a scheduled time, so we'll. Uh, okay. I keep seeing more questions, man. Uh, I think that this will be never ending. So like I said, just DM on WhatsApp. I'll just put it again. I think we got a lot more audience today than expected. So yeah, I think if I knew it beforehand, I would have compressed the session into a shorter time frame and extended the AMA session. But what I'll do is maybe I'll schedule an AMA next week, maybe similar time, and we can take more queries there. What maybe I can do is I'll just put it for AMA itself so that we can answer, uh, go over everyone's queries. And in case you're not able to make it there, you can just DM on WhatsApp. And just shared it for people who have joined here. Cool. I think that's about it, folks. Thank you for joining in on a Wednesday night. And have a great week ahead. Have a great weekend. And yeah, overall, uh, let's I'm looking forward to seeing your submissions, uh, especially the Capstone project. Like I feel even like writing it down, I feel this is a pretty cool project to showcase on your portfolio, especially this visitor sign in and add comments. It's a good proof of work to showcase because let's say someone is signing in and then commenting, right? It also shows that hey, those many visitors have come to your website and you are supporting those many number of users. And it's very easy to see. It's very visual. The complexity is very quick to see. So yeah, if you end up making this capstone project or any other thing which showcases all of those things, database, API, and deployment, feel free to drop me an email to this ID, swapnil@capture.com. And yeah, looking forward to seeing some of your submissions. Cool, folks. Have a nice day. Bye bye.